for Women, also known as Special Cells for Women and Children, it constitutes the core of our work, the bulk of our work. But we do end up working through various other means and mechanisms on violence against women. And we focus specifically on crisis interventions. So I just want to be clear, we are not a purely research and advocacy unit. We do not necessarily look at incidents of violence so much as response. Yeah. So I'm just going to, I want to start off by saying, please don't call me ma'am, whoever else you want to call ma'am, okay? Feel free to call me Taranga, even in interaction. How Aarti and I have planned this is that I'll speak for about 15 to 18 minutes. Aarti will take up the rest of the time, so we get to about an hour. And then we have substantial amount of time, at least half an hour, for questions and interactions. We already have some of the questions which have come from you to the organizers. And we will be prepared to answer those or anything else that comes up. Yeah. So Serin, I hope I can share my screen. Is that possible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. 1 second. I thought I didn't know if it has been enabled or not. Just a second. Let me make it full screen. View full screen mode. Right.
Visible.
Okay. Yeah, but I can't. I can see now. Right. Okay. So please excuse how the lighting is in my house. I'm actually shifting house tomorrow, so a lot of things are not like very ideal as a background. But I think that the PPT should engage you. And please remember that we are practitioners. We are not purely academics, though we do have a quasi-academic role. So feel free to engage with us like that, but bear with us also for that purpose. Yeah. So this is the board of the Special Cell for Women in Dadar Police Station. This was started in 1988. The very first special cell was in the Commissioner of Police office in Mumbai, which started in 1984. So 4 years before this. This board looks not exactly the same, but it is still there in Dadar Police Station because our cell is still there. So what is this work? How did it start? So I'm sure you heard this a zillion times, but I'm just going to run you through this again very quickly. That, as you know, all schools of social work or professional social work education, especially higher education, involves engagement with the field, with people or communities or systems that we are intervening with, concurrent to theoretical or conceptual discussion and teaching, right? So there are two ways this happens. One is through concurrent field work for students, which faculty and people like us practitioners on ground help supervise. Yeah. And the other is something called field action. So field action essentially means that a school of social work in its surroundings, in its local surroundings or context, it decides to work through students, through faculty, and then sometimes like in the present case, through separate full-time staff who are project staff or field action staff, to work with communities, groups, systems which are locally around, and where there is an issue which is a human rights issue or a marginalization issue or an issue of power imbalances. Yeah. So the TISS School of Social Work didn't used to be called the School of Social Work. It was primarily a School of Social Work in itself as a university when it started. And Professor Meenakshi Apte was a very, far-sighted, foresighted professional and an academic who had a lot of connections, and she taught in TISS, and she also had a lot of connections with social reform movements as well as women's movement in the 1970s and 80s, since the 1970s and 80s. So along with things like, helping create the position of family court counselor, which is in the Family Court Act, also the Swadhar scheme, which is now a scheme of Government of India. One of the things that she realized in her engagement with women's movement in the early 1980s, late 1970s, at the time of the Mathura rape case, at the time of when mothers, working class mothers of young women who were killed in dowry deaths in Delhi and other cities, when the Bhavri Devi gang rape case, in all of these cases, the women's movement had reorganized itself and taken up advocacy with the government to say that you need special schemes and mechanisms and programs and laws and clauses within laws and systems to address violence. Because so far that new independent India ka government had for the previous whatever 30 years, 35 years been focusing on women's empowerment, women's participation, women's education, representation in local self-governance, so on, and literacy mission, etc. But not so much on specific forms of violence and what to do after violence has occurred. Yeah. So it was in this context in 1984 that the Special Cell for Women was started in collaboration with the then Commissioner of Police, who's also the forefather of police reforms in India, Mr. Julio Ribeiro, who recently did a very good interview also on the current state of policing in India and so on, and laws in India, with somebody. I'll try and remember who it is by the end of this class. You can check out, you can read his books, etc. So Professor Apte and Mr. Ribeiro decided to collaborate to place two trained professional social workers, those who had completed their MA in social work from TISS, within the Commissioner of Police office or any other working functional police location, to help answer the multiple concurrent needs of any woman survivor of violence, yeah, which included a lot of families of policemen themselves, all right, who did not get support elsewhere and came to the Commissioner of Police in his Janta Darbar, etc., to say that, this man is being violent with me, himself is a police wala, police station does not take my complaint, what do I do? To also women and children who are facing violence and whom police, which by the way at that time did not even have 33% court mandated reservation for women in the police force, they did not have the wherewithal, there were not enough people, there was not enough resources, there was not adequate training. So it was in this context that the Special Cell for Women was started in 1984 in Maharashtra. Eventually, when we found, with the help of other funding agencies, external evaluations, government departments of both police and WCD, that this is something that is useful to both women survivors of violence coming to police stations in various districts as well as to the police system itself, then we did advocacy and successfully handed it over as a scheme to the government of Maharashtra, of which we are a kind of technical support and partial implementation partner. Now, what happened in around 2002 was that, people like you who were students who were of social work, who had been placed in the special cells for field work, etc., they started going to other states, to funding agencies, to women's rights groups, civil liberties groups in other states, and working there. And they took the special cells learning to those places. Yeah. So just to make this connect for you with social work education and you as students of social work, it is in this manner that the police systems and NGOs and women's groups from across various states from 2002 came and said, help us replicate this in our state context. Eventually what happened is that the existing team of those special cells in Maharashtra could not focus on both the expansion to taluk level within Maharashtra as well as doing this work outside. So that is why then that we came up with, we consolidated in 2007-8 as a resource center for interventions on violence against women. We also began to work on legal drafting, like for the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005, where we worked with, Lawyers Collective with Advocate Indira Jaisingh to do that. So we started doing a whole range of things based on that 15-20 years of special cells' approach. Now, very quickly, what is special cells and who does it work with? You must remember that in the context of violence interventions and the context from which we are speaking, especially, women come to a police or a criminal justice system primarily once they have taken help from many others, including hospital, mental health services, women's groups, NGOs, local political parties or formations, women's groups, neighbors, extended family, religious institutions, and they have not been able to stop the violence or address all her needs which have arisen in that situation of violence. So so in a sense, what special cells does is work at a secondary prevention level, no more escalation of violence, end the ongoing violence, and meet all of the woman's needs, justicing and otherwise, which nobody else has been able to meet. Yeah, we'll give you the links later. I'll put down my email ID, or you can take it from Mufassir or whoever, that you can write to us for the links to all our evaluation studies, etc. So what do we do in the special cell? Like I said, there are 2 social workers. In many states, there are men who are part of the special cell, but we have no less than 1 woman social worker in each special cell, ideally 2 people overall. Yeah, and what we do is we use social work methods from a feminist approach or feminist lens. So we place what the woman wants and what she decides at the center of the problem solving process. So when you do methods, right, in social work, you learn about the problem solving process, hai na? So that problem solving process becomes feminist when we are unlike and yes, somebody put in the chat that they remember my class from the first year FC course. So exactly, because like I told you that time, we don't go from a functional or functionalist perspective. We are not looking at pathology of the individual. We are looking at that person in the context of a power structure, which in our case we are looking at patriarchy, which causes all forms of gender based and age based and body based violence. So we do this problem solving process very much, okay, using skills which come from other fields, which includes counseling. So this is where I'm connecting this with mental health, so that you have an idea of an understanding of where this locates when for you as students who are specializing in mental health in particular. Counseling skills in the social work framework are used as skills. Yeah, we have to have knowledge and conceptual understanding, but the implementation of those skills is through set social work methods. That includes work with individuals, what you learn as work with individuals, which we otherwise call social casework, we used to call earlier. So that is individual meetings we do group work or work with groups. So that is joint meetings, whether with family or other people. We work with systems, we work with communities. We use very specific social work specific methods like home visits, yeah, collateral meetings, referrals, structured referrals to and from other services. Yes. So how is this implemented in a feminist manner? For example, we ensure that even in our formal documentation, so since we come from the social work framework, all interventions, the entire process, whether 1 month long or 3 years long, is written down in a structured format in a register, yeah, which is maintained in the special cell. There are review meetings, there is monthly collection of data, quarterly, we use that data to analyze, strengthen our work. We do micro researches on methods and on strategies so that we can feed it back into our work and improve our work. We do advocacy based on the collated anonymized data. But what is important is that we are doing all of this keeping the woman in mind. So for example, we have also changed the language that comes from traditional social work or from police systems, etc. As you will see at the bottom of this slide, for example, we never write that this case is closed or compromised or resolved. We always ensure that as social workers, what we are telling the woman when that particular phase of intervention is over is, you can always come back. Do call for follow-up. Otherwise, tell us when we should call you on your safe number at a safe time agreed interval. Yeah. So that case closing, case resolving, whether police is saying it or whether a more traditional mental clinical psychological understanding of social work interventions is saying it, we reject that language and we make it survivor centric. So a woman can come back at any point, because if the women's movement has not ended violence overall in all these years, it is unfair in our understanding as feminist social workers to expect that one particular woman with a sustained intervention from us for a relatively short period of time, even though it is prolonged in many ways, that it should end the violence completely in her life. Yeah. So I'm just running through this very quickly. It's important to understand that as social workers, we look at violence, and not only domestic violence but also domestic violence. We look at our location within a system, and Aarti has worked in the health and the hospital systems and on telephonic helplines as well, so she will go into this in more detail. See, a social worker or a crisis interventionist role is not the same as a psychiatrist or as a therapist of any sort. Okay, a telephonic counselor, all right, of a psychosocial services helpline is working with a team of people to meet multiple needs. Yeah, the same way, whether you are placed in hospital system in Dilasa or in the police station as special cell social worker or as the family court counselor, the idea is that as a social worker, you use all your skills not only to meet the mental and emotional needs of a woman, but to coordinate a multi-agency response to all her very unique needs. So each survivor, and not just a woman, a child, a queer person, trans person, whoever it is that is coming to us, they each have very unique needs, and we have to ensure that emotional and mental well-being is ensured by meeting of all of those needs. So I want to be very clear that as special cells, mental health is an area that we have an understanding of, but our work, our model, our approach believes that a woman needs different kinds of things that contribute to the rebuilding of her mental and emotional well-being, which has been, that mental and emotional well-being has been snatched away from her in the process of cyclical long-term violence, especially when it is domestic violence or intimate partner violence. So about 40% on average of the referrals come to us from police, 40% on average come to us having heard from ex-clients or heard about us directly because we've gotten established in that particular center, and then we make referrals and make connections and linkages accordingly. Yeah. So based on this work, like I said, we do a lot of work across 15 states and one union territory, and we've worked on helplines, we've worked on laws, we've worked with programs and interventions that are coming from the more formal mental health discourse or academic space, like iCall, which is also psychosocial services helpline nevertheless, yeah, which is also TISS field action project, and we try and look at mental health as something which is part of a comprehensive response to violence against women, but not the only part of it. Yeah. Now I'm just going to so yeah, we've done a lot of publications, etc., which are available in the office, on campus, or online. I'm just going to very quickly stop sharing this screen right now. Yeah. And Aarti, just give me 5 minutes more so that I can highlight a couple of things that are very specific to us in special cells, if that's okay with you. Is that all right, Aarti?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I hope I'm not going too fast, and I'm very sorry for the background noise. I cannot do anything about this. It is the, society may somebody is on a cycle. So, right. Yeah. A couple of things that I want to say very quickly about our learning in special cells, which I will then, I'm sure Aarti will elaborate on it, but I think that you can take away as social work professionals and students who are interested in training to be able to do a feminist or a survivor centric, at least, response to domestic violence or any form of violence for that matter. One or two very important things that we've observed in our data over the years in our work is that, there are two ways in which mental health gets implicated in our work. Okay. One is where women already have mental health issues, okay, not necessarily illness, but mental health issues, all right, of varying degrees, varying kinds. And that is made as that is the basis upon which, or the so-called reason, factor, a precipitating factor for violence upon her, especially by families. And this is not only marital family, but natal family also. Yeah. So there is various forms of violence that take place because a woman may have certain may be living with certain kinds of mental health issues. Yeah. The other side is the other way in which mental health, and which is why we need to understand and learn mental health as social workers who are working on violence against women interventions in particular, is that a lot of women, their mental health does get impacted rather seriously as an outcome of prolonged violence, especially physical violence, sustained social isolation of a woman. So for example, one of the worst and most standout in that sense, interventions that one of my colleagues had actually carried out was where there was this woman who she had a PhD. And this also relates to one of the questions that somebody had asked about education. She had a PhD. She was working in a research institute. I mean, she was a scientist. And this is many, many years ago. I won't say in which state and in which special cell, obviously. And after marriage, she was, there was a lot of some of the terms that now have come into practice, and which is good to define certain forms of mental violence and emotional violence. She was constantly gaslighted about, being overeducated. And then eventually what was done was that she was stopped being, she was prevented from going to work. her phone was taken away, her ways of accessing credit, her cards, her bank checkbook, passbook, etc. were taken away from her, and eventually she did develop some fairly serious forms of mental health issues, which once we were able to intervene as special cells, we did need to get her support of mental health professionals, yeah, and not social workers. Okay, so this is just an example of how mental health can be impacted through and by prolonged or sustained violence. Yeah, otherwise, I mean, things that we do get to see and that we occasionally refresh our own training or understanding on is, seeing and understanding and recognizing PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorders, many other things, so on and so forth, which we do see in survivors of certain forms of violence, especially physical violence. Yeah, so those are some of the things that we do keep in mind, and that you also can and should, if you intend to go into working on violence against women of any form, especially in terms of crisis intervention. Yeah, another one of the important things that therefore we realized in our work is that in our detailed documentation, which we were talking about, that we are very careful not to use mental health illness related terms for a woman's emotional or mental health presentation when she comes to the special cell. So, and it takes a lot of work, because a lot of us, I mean, sorry if I break into Hindi occasionally, because I tend to, I'll repeat it in English if somebody doesn't understand. But a lot of the times, no, we tend to, this word depression, whether it is, it becomes part of our language, even in Indian language. Yeah, in very desi languages. So a lot of us use, as crisis interventionists or as social work professionals, we very unthinkingly use the term depression, whereas depression itself is a clinically defined term. Yeah, but the problem with right now, if a woman comes and says, now a woman who is a survivor is also part of that world, of this world of ours, this very desi language wala word, where she can come and say, madam mujhe depression ho gaya hai. Now, there are two sides of this. In special cells, as feminist social workers, we try to write down everything as described by the woman herself. But when she says, I am depressed, ya mujhe depression ho gaya hai, madam, we don't write that down in that form. Yeah. Why? Because later, and this is a big danger, that these documents, because they are maintained formally within a governmental system, they can be called upon if a case goes to court, if the woman is almost killed, or there's an attempt on her life, or if she actually dies, especially, and then bringing justice in that case becomes very difficult, because very many perpetrators of violence, whether families or individual men or groups of men, they very often say, ye to pagal hai, okay, she's mad. So it's not only telling, violence is not only telling a woman, you are mad, you are mad, you are mad, till she begins to believe it. It is also making a woman look mad, as it were, in courts, and then saying, so therefore she has harmed herself. How can you say that I harmed her? She harmed herself. It was a stove burst because she used to forget. She would switch on the stove and she would go around the house singing and dancing. She would forget. Yeah, she just walked into the middle of the street because she's lost her mind. Yeah, many times these days, in the last 5-6 years, 10 years roughly, actually we are seeing that a lot of men, when they are coming to the special cell, not women, men are coming to the special saying, देखो देखो मेरी बीवी भाग गई है या मुझे छोड़ के, and look, that here we had taken her to the psychiatrist and we had got her this medicine prescribed also. This is a form of, like, like applying for precautionary bail, okay, preventive bail, preemptive bail. It's like that. A lot of men do that, and eventually when we try to contact a woman through phone call, of course we don't write her the formal call letter as we would write to a man when a woman comes speaking about violence and seeking our help. When, if we manage to reach the woman through telephonic means, and we tell her that, we are a women centric program, we provide services to women survivors of violence, many women say, oh really, then can you help me, because I have just managed to save myself from these people and leave that house or leave that family, but I mean, look at how they are trying to. And then we have to work on getting that violence to stop, which is this preparation for a case, for everything from divorce to snatching custody of the child, to everything possible, saying that this woman is mad and or insane or psychologically, mentally ill and hence unfit for marriage or unfit for getting her rights in the property or her custody over children. Yeah, so this I think is a very important thing for you all to keep in mind, that don't accept when you're working on violence of any kind, not only domestic violence or gender based violence, please don't go in looking at either social work or mental health or legal discourse as something that is objective. It never is. Yeah, and I'm Aarti, I'm sure you can add to this slightly later, but I just want to make this very, very clear that there is a functional and a patriarchal side of mental health practice as well. There are a lot of very third rate so-called mental health specialists who are not really, who are very who engage with perpetrators and families to gaslight women, to help prove that women are ill and incapable. Yeah, whereas actually all the needs of the woman being met with a combination of a social worker and possibly other interventionists or service providers, including mental health service providers, can help rebuild her and help her take control of her life again. Yeah, in the context of patriarchal violence. So another very important thing to remember, and I'm being frank with you, it's quite a challenge even amongst what is now our very large team across 15 states and hundreds of special cells that are implemented, and we ourselves are implementing about 35 across 8 states now and multiple districts. It's difficult, but we do try constantly to ensure that if any referrals have to be made by the special cell social worker, then they are to telephonic helplines which do psychosocial services. We refer to trusted and good psychologists and counselors. We try and identify feminist counselors. Yeah, but we don't do the first or direct referral to psychiatrists. We do not do it. Yeah, unless there is some and we do not do that independent of that. Also very important, it doesn't matter if you have already trained in psychology or in clinical psychology or in counseling or have done a degree in that also. Please remember in what position or what capacity you are working in an interventions program. If your designation says social worker or coordinator or program manager or helpline, whatever, do not make diagnoses independently. Do not forget about prescribing anything. Do not make diagnoses anywhere formally in your documentation or verbally or in your interactions with the client, as we say in social work. Yeah, so don't do that, because you are not practicing as a mental health specialist, as a practitioner, a licensed practitioner. You are not doing that in that space, and you can end up doing much more damage through just even in a telephonic or an in-person conversation trying to indicate some kind of diagnosis. Yeah, so make referrals. You may be 100% sure due to your knowledge, as would Aarti, for example, who's also trained in psychology formally, that maybe 100% sure that this is what is being, this is the presentation, right, from the client. So it must be this issue, but let a formally licensed person do that in conjunction with you. Yeah, you don't do it. All right. One of the last few things I want to say is that, because we don't want to contribute to this larger language or propaganda of women and mental health issues, that's why families break, or that's why so much so-called violence is not really violence. We don't want to contribute to that. So when we maintain data at a aggregated level and then disaggregated, anonymized, we try not to contribute to any kind of recording or analysis in that sense of mental health or mental illness. Yeah, mental health issues or illness. Yeah, we look at that at a very disaggregated picture, cell wise, to feedback into our own training and work, but we don't do this in our formal reporting, etc. Yeah, so I just want to close with that. And Aarti, if there's anything you think I missed, you can tell me. Otherwise, over to you. Let me also quickly introduce Aarti. Aarti, my colleague, is an extremely experienced crisis interventionist. Like I said, she's worked with Sehat, with HRLN, especially in interventions in a lot of sexual assault and sexual violence cases for both adults and child survivors. And she is currently leading all our interventions work across all these states. And she has contributed to the editing of a very important book which you should all actually read, called Feminist Counseling in India, which came out about 3 years ago, right? I think 3 years ago, yeah, by and Padma Devasthali, Sangeeta Rege, Aparna Joshi, they are the co-editors also. And I think that that's a very important book for you to understand where mental health, violence, and feminist social work practice come together. So Aarti, please, over to you, and thank you so much. Yep.
Thanks. I think Taranga has very clearly established the link between violence and mental health. Yeah, that there is a cyclic relationship. Have you understood the cyclic relationship in the sense that where the two situations that she presented, where women may come in with a certain prevalence of mental illness, mental health issues, which become a cause for, which become an excuse for, it's not really a cause, which becomes an excuse to inflict violence, and then she falls further into the cycle of violence. Yeah, I hope that's very clear, because that's how we've seen it happen on the field through our entire interventions work. There's been a lot of development in the past, over the past decade, as far as mental health is concerned in India. With all the signing of the, at the World Health Assembly, with India signing off, and then can any of you just talk of what may have been some of the progress in terms of mental health, legally or policy wise? Are you allowed to unmute and just go ahead, or does the co-host have to do that? Host or co-host?
They can unmute and talk.
Okay, thank you. So anybody feel free, policy or legally, any changes that you may have heard of as far as mental health is concerned?
I think everyone is feeling shy.
Yeah, don't feel shy. That's all I can say. Feel free. Come on, I already told you policy. What would be the policy?
Ma'am, there have been a lot of policies. So, for instance, the Mental Health Care Act that just recently.
That's the act. That's the legal. Yeah. Policy would be the?
I don't know.
Yeah, the National Mental Health Policy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you also have the National Mental Health Survey, which laid grounds to actually recommend that an act is required, and then the policy is required. All of that has, the policy came in, and then this NMHS also took place, and we've had the act in place now. So there's been progress in those terms, and if you actually look closely at all this material, if you read from point of view of violence, there is some mention of violence in it, in the sense at least there is some recognition that violence is linked with mental health. Yeah. For instance, National Mental Health Survey said that there is a link between violence and non-communicable diseases. Also, there is a link between violence and common mental health, mental disorders. You know, like when we talk of stress, anxiety, these are all very closely linked with violence. Yeah. As far as the policy is concerned, it also talks of increasing access to mental health services, reducing risk factors and incidents of suicide and attempted suicide. Do you think there's a link between suicide and violence? Suicide, attempted suicide, and violence? What is the link? Don't just say yes. Quickly, anybody?
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ma'am, I think from the rural context, there is a link between suicide and violence in terms of, I heard some cases that female from rural area take this decision of suicide due to beaten from their husband when he drunk and he came to house. So they a lot of time they think that this is the last solution of this.
Okay. Thanks, Yashwant. I think you brought up two aspects. One is that violence can lead to a mental health, a state of distress where a person can actually think of ending their life. And the second point that you brought up is actually a global debate on the causal or correlational link between alcohol and violence. Okay, and a lot of studies point out that it may be correlational, but it is not causal. Because that is, even women will come in saying that wo peeta hai isiliye wo marta hai. But one of the things that we also need to work on is that it can escalate, but it is not the cause, because we know that not all people engaging in alcohol abuse are violent, and on the other hand, it works the other way around as well. Yeah, it's all about power and inflicting and using your power on the person. So thanks for bringing that up. Since you mentioned rural, it's very much seen even in the urban context. If you go to hospitals, you'll find at least 3 or 4 people who are admitted on a daily basis. And when you go, women admitted for consumption of poison, which is actually a suicide attempt. And when you speak to them, you will understand that there is some violence either from partner or from natal family or from the marital family. Yeah, there's some kind of familial violence. And in some cases, yes, there could be sexual violence also. But mostly we find that there is a link with domestic violence over there when you go and speak to them. So that is the link. And why I bring that up in the context of policy and legal development is because earlier on, suicide attempt itself was criminalized, which was a sad state of affairs. But we've seen that has changed now, where Section 309 of the IPC has been read down to understand that that suicide when attempted can be due to distress. Okay. And that has come in because of the Mental Health Care Act, because of all the advocacy by different organizations working with people in distress. They have actually read down Section 309 to presume that unless proved otherwise, it is because it was caused by severe stress. Okay, so they will not be punished, which means there needs to be a change in the entire approach to it's worked both ways. Okay, one is that, of course, groups and organizations working on the issue have constantly raised that a person who is attempting suicide is actually someone who is in distress and it's a cry for help. On the other hand, it also led to a lot of defensive practice where you would find that in hospitals when they were reaching, the doctors wouldn't record the reason for or the cause for distress. They would record it as accidental consumption of poison. Whereas it's not an accident, right? It's an intentional act. But very important to document that there was violence as an underlying factor, which played a huge role in this decision. So this reading down would help in actually documenting it properly. And that is one of the spaces where social workers can play a very big role. If you're sitting in a hospital as a medical social worker, you are working there, or you have some kind of internship, would be very interesting to see how psychiatry documents all this. Because by default, anybody who is admitted for attempted suicide is referred to psychiatry. Okay, and over there, what we have seen is that they don't really document that the woman says that there was violence in the relationship. That is not documented. What they document it as is a marital maladjustment. But it's not maladjustment, right? It's nothing to do with adjustment. It's everything to do with violence. So that is where your role, advocacy, working with such a department would go hand in hand. Like Taranga pointed out, there are a whole host of people who can work together to ensure that all this is not only documented, but also responded to in the right manner. So say you're a social worker, for instance, even a special child social worker would actually try to understand the distress level, even if there is some kind of psychiatric care and treatment that the person is pursuing. It would be important to understand the psychological, psychosocial part of it also. For instance, there would be fathers coming in and saying that, I'll tell you a recent example of a father who came in with a prescription saying that my daughter is mentally ill. Here is her prescription, put her in a shelter, otherwise she'll run away with the person that she's chosen. Very clearly, from a feminist point of view, you have to recognize the agency of the individual. And even the Mental Health Care Act itself has spoken a lot about agency of individuals. And here we are adding to that the feminist perspective, right? So you would recognize her agency and want to speak to the woman herself to understand what is it that she wants. And we need to understand the difference between distress and absolute disorder level. The woman is in distress. Understand that distress, speak to her, engage with her. Within a few moments, you will understand whether she's engaging with you or not. If you find that she's totally disoriented, see, there needs to be a cause also for you to refer to a psychiatrist, not simply because she says so or because you feel there is no link in what she's saying. There has to be a clear understanding of why you want to refer. Is she not oriented in time, place, and person? Is she talking completely something else that you are asking? And then also, asking 2-3 questions to understand whether it's a language issue, which is quite often it can be a case in a country like ours where dialects may differ, usage of words may differ. So understanding all that diversity also is important not just blindly referring. Yeah, so you would speak to the individual and see if they really want to go into that shelter or not. Then we found that, okay, that woman had actually been to some kind of space which she did not like. So exploring why she did not like it. Shelter homes are not the best places to be in, considering the state of affairs nowadays. So understanding why the woman is saying what she is, not questioning it as to why, but understanding where she's coming from. Yeah, what is her context that she's coming from, and then taking it from there. So you would give her that kind of agency, and that's what makes the entire intervention feminist. What do you think is the difference between mainstream counseling and feminist counseling? What is so great about feminist counseling, or why do we keep focusing on that, talking about it? Anybody? You can just give keywords also if you want. Break the silence. Come on.
कोई तो कुछ तो बोलो. W.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Pulak, you go ahead. Pulak, go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Angfu. So basically, ma'am, it all comes down to, I guess, I don't know, but I'm just guessing, agency, where it's not a hierarchical relationship where the psychiatrist or the social worker is at a position of power and is dictating or making decisions for the person, and it's more like an alliance where you are getting informed from the client itself as to how she wants to tackle her situation, and you just assist in a way, or it's an equal partnership alliance instead of a hierarchical.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's not a guess. Bang on. Yeah. And Angfu?
Yes. Hello, ma'am. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. So in post-colonial studies, there's this debate about the medium of instruction in schools. And a lot of academicians, they acknowledge the legacy that English has in the education system, and they argue against the idea, but at the same time they don't blame anyone for mastering the art of English, because it's a systemic issue. So along similar lines, what I like about feminist social work is that the onus of certain problems is not on the client, because it's a systemic issue after all.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, both of you. Anybody else wants to add?
Can I add something to it?
Yes.
Ma'am, what I also think is that feminist counseling, unlike mainstream counseling, would be more focused and more sensitive towards the women's issue, the current situation of women. For example, counseling might be to do with the individual's concern, and feminist counseling would also acknowledge the status of women and like adopt a perspective or an approach which is sensitive towards
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rashmi. Anyone else?
Aarti, someone has written in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Someone, no, I'll read it out. So, Diksha has said, I think feminist counseling also requires making women aware of their rights.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, Khushbu, you want to say something? Anyone else? Yeah, you've said all of it, most of it. You've spoken about agency as an alliance, as a partnership more than anything. There's breaking the hierarchy. It also involves recognizing that power relation. You know, there is a certain amount of power being in that position. To recognize that and then work at this as a collaboration and as being a facilitator in the entire process is what makes it feminist. And yes, definitely making her aware of her rights. Personal is political. Linking her up with resources and the larger movement wherever possible. And also what you said about it's not pointing fingers at her. It's talking about the social issues and the context around that has developed this kind of a situation. Yeah. And what's important, even in mainstream psychiatry, is to break this entire biomedical approach, psychologizing everything, it's called. Yeah, she's traumatized, she's depressed, using all these words very loosely, as Taranga pointed out, is a problem. Okay. While even use of such jargons is a problem, because not everybody is traumatized. People are resilient, and feminist counseling recognizes that resilience within the woman. She may have used several coping mechanisms to confront. She may have even she has been confronting the violence. It's just that she's come to you at a point probably where there has been a breakdown of those coping mechanisms. When someone in distress calls a helpline, there is a breakdown in her coping mechanism, and that is why she's called. It doesn't mean that she doesn't have any coping mechanisms or that she's never confronted violence. She's never said no. It's not like she hasn't put up a fight before. Even the fact that she's come to you means that she is on her journey and she's fighting it throughout. That is something that feminist counseling recognizes. Yeah. And does not point the blame towards her. It's a very psychosocial approach, understanding the factors around. For example, like I said, this entire documentation of it as marital maladjustment. What does it mean? That she's not adjusting. She has this problem. There is a conflict. Understand the difference in relations when you're talking. There is a difference in power relations when you talk of conflict, jhagda hua. Use of those kind of terminology is very different from violence. There's a clear-cut power play over here when you talk of violence. So it's very different from conflict. Fight happens between equals. It doesn't, violence, there's clear power difference. And feminist counseling recognizes all of that. When you talk of skills, more or less, your basic counseling skills would still play a huge role, like listening, validating, paraphrasing, but you will use a feminist lens. All of these points that you just brought up, you would use all of that and apply them to the skills. Yeah. When we talk of recognizing the resilience, inner strength of the woman and exploring the coping mechanisms that she's used so far, it also shows that feminist counseling, you recognize that every individual is unique. Just because all the women coming to Special Cell have faced violence does not make them the same. There is a huge difference in each of their stories, in each of the ways that each of them has fought it, confronted it, that would differ. The other thing is also recognizing where they, the entire intersectionality matrix, where you stand, what are your privileges, all of that influence mental health also per se, but also your experience of violence is also influenced by where you stand on that entire matrix. Yeah. It is very participatory versus prescriptive, like you pointed out. For instance, a psychiatrist would probably not give much attention to the story that the woman is talking about. It's very biomedical, like I said. Even clinical psychologists, we find, do a lot of diagnosis, like Taranga pointed out. I can give you an example of a very sad situation where someone had just been rescued from a shelter home for children where he'd faced sexual abuse, and then because they had to get him admission into another school, actually made him go through an IQ test. Why am I bringing this up as a concern or a sad state of affairs? Anybody? What do you think is a problem with this, or is there a problem? Or are they two independent things?
Ma'am, you
Take
got
a
cut off.
shot.
Could you please repeat this
Sorry?
the part that you're asking us a question about? Could you please repeat your question? You got a little cut off in my net. My net is bad. Sorry.
Yeah. What I asked is, I was giving you a situation where someone who had just gone through sexual abuse, an adolescent, because he was rescued from the shelter home after having understood that he has faced sexual abuse, had to change his school. Okay, and it was advised that he go through an IQ test. So they conducted an IQ test on him. Why am I presenting this as an issue or a matter of concern? Are they two independent issues, or is it linked?
I think it is linked, but linked in the sense that what does IQ or anything have to do with suffering sexual assault? Is this to evaluate how gravely the assault affected the adolescent? Then that's just unfair. You can't measure trauma, you can't compare trauma.
Yeah, IQ is definitely not the way to go to even assess the impact. They just felt that he was a bit slow, and they decided to go ahead with the test to see whether he needed a special school or whether he could go into a mainstream school. So is that okay?
I'm still thinking.
Okay. Yeah, it is food for thought, because while some may look at this as independent, see, clearly the people who actually asked for that test were not actually linking it to the abuse, even though they were informed about it. The problem is in the timing. The person is already going through emotional distress. Isn't that going to affect the way you perform on an intelligence test?
Absolutely. Emotional
Yeah.
distress.
Yeah, so that is the problem with this mindless psychological testing. And the other, so, without really understanding the psychosocial point of view, if mainstream looks at it as only intrapersonal. And what intrapersonal ends up doing is saying that I am the problem. But what about those around me? What about what's happening around me? That is a problem because of which I am who I am. It's influencing me. And that is something that mainstream often fails to recognize. That's the problem. Yeah. The other thing that feminist counseling does is very clearly say that violence is non-negotiable. Okay. Even in work with perpetrators, it is very, very clear. A clear message would go out that violence is non-negotiable. At special cells, we do have joint meetings where we call in the perpetrator, the man who may be, or whoever the perpetrator of violence is. But it doesn't mean that it would be a very it's quite clear that, look, violence will not be tolerated. It doesn't mean that we are going to fight with him, but that message will go loud and clear. Yeah. There will be no compromise on the woman's dignity. For example, the man may come in and say that every day she's calling her mother's, every day she's calling her mother. Where is the need to call her so many times? Once a week chalta hai na. Now, we will not compromise there on her dignity and say, yeah, okay, you can call once a week, that is enough. Even if the woman says, okay, I will adjust, I will call once a week. No, that's feminist. You are challenging him for his patriarchal views and not compromising the woman's dignity. Yeah. So there is that clear message that goes out from a legal point of view, because even law recognizes violence as a crime. And there are civil laws also to support it. And that message goes loud and clear. It's also about connecting her with resources, like I said. Resources could be other stakeholders. It could be a lot of reading material. It could be update, like someone pointed out about her knowing your own rights, because information is also empowerment. It's all to do with empowerment. Yeah, helping her or facilitating the process such that she can raise her voice further and continue to take whatever steps it does to stop the violence in her life. And what we do is offer that safe space, that space where the woman feels safe. Safety is also a lot to do with that feeling, isn't it? Which is why safety assessment and plan in feminist counseling is so important. At every meeting, or if you're on a helpline, at every call, it's very important to assess safety of the person who's calling or who's coming and meeting you. At every meeting, it's not enough to say, okay, last time I did a safety plan, so this time it's not required. Assuming safety would be a mistake. It's a feeling, it's a perception. You need to ask the woman whether she feels safe. And even if she says that, and feeling, there are many checklists that one can use to assess safety. Some questions would be like, has violence increased over the past year? Has he threatened to kill you? Or even when there are threats, we do ask whether she feels that she believes that he will kill. So there's a difference between perception, the threat, and the feeling that he may actually carry out the threat. It's not to say that if he's threatening and she feels he will not go ahead with it, there will be no safety plan. No, your intervention would differ based on how she feels or how she's perceiving the situation. And of course, safety also includes safety of self, so self-harm in that sense, whether she has had feelings of ending her life, whether she's tried it before, what happened, all of that would be explored, and it's important to assess and develop a safety plan based on that. And this holds true for people who've gone through sexual violence as well. I do read, Pratima has written that according to NCRB data, more women attempted suicide because of sexual violence than any other form of violence. Probably it's because I said that at the hospital, we find a lot of them who come in with domestic violence, who have attempted. There would be a clear difference in the profile of women coming into each space, which is why even your prevalence data would vary. See, NCRB shows reported data. It shows, it would probably show you completed suicide. I'm not sure how attempted suicide would be reported now with reading down of 309 in the case of violence. Pratima, maybe you can clarify. But there's a difference between what is reported to the police and what may be experienced, which you may find from the NFHS data, National Family Health Survey, which would again differ from data of spaces like special cells, which are system-based services like special cells or a Dilasa. It would differ. Or a community-based would have even more prevalence data, because women may just walk into that space and they may feel free to walk in any time. They may decide when, based on what they want, they may decide which system to go to. So prevalence data would differ from space to space. I think we've already covered why documentation is so important, and how we need to do it in the woman's own words, so that we don't end up, that whole principle in counseling of do no harm. It's very important. Unintentionally also, sometimes this may end up being harmful. So using her own words, clarifying what she's saying. If we already know in a certain local dialect that, okay, feminist counseling also involves that. Suppose she uses some term which can be derogatory. That will be explained to her. It's part of that entire knowledge is empowerment. To say that why the terminology is different. Not only for herself, but also for use on anyone else. Okay, so do you get what I'm saying? I hope you're able to understand what I'm saying in terms of use of certain terms. Like, in Tamil, there's this very common word, loose. Okay, and your National Mental Health Survey also brings out a whole list of terms that are used in regional languages, which can be quite derogatory to refer to persons with mental illness. That would also be explained, that why we don't use such terms. What is See, remember that the woman, even in all that mental health trouble, illness, whatever it is able to actually pick up the phone and call your number, walk into your space, okay, where you have set up the service. She has that much understanding, orientation, agency, which means you need to recognize that and work with it. Yeah. So that's why I say distress, disease, disorder, understand the difference, assess it, see before you just dive into referring to psychiatry mechanically or saying that, okay, mental health professional only is required. In fact, WHO talks of, when they talk of policy formation, they speak a lot about deinstitutionalizing mental health services. And there's a lot of move towards community health, community mental health care. A lot of organizations have also worked on it, and now we've got the district mental health services also. The plans, programs are all geared towards that. And also integrating mental health care into general health services. So rather than, early days we used to see, we continue to see, but there is a lot of advocacy for change on that. Institutions, psychiatric care homes, lot of reports on what has been happening there, use of all those ECT, shock treatments, all that, we've gone past those days. But there is a lot of, we've already said that there's a lot of violence inflicted using all this as an excuse, yeah, or using this as a premise, mental health issues as a premise. So even WHO has recommended all of that, and India is making efforts along with a lot of advocacy from feminist groups and groups of organizations working on mental health. I'll now get on with a little bit about, since many of you were talking about COVID and how have things changed or how are things different during COVID. Yes, definitely. See, there is that proximity to the abuser. People are now, have been at least during the lockdown, locked up in the same space. Earlier, where one of the coping mechanisms may be to just leave the house, leave the abusive space at that point in time. Maybe now she wasn't able to. There's restricted mobility, reduced access to resources also, because even if she wanted to leave the space and go, there's no public transport to take her. So then you have, of course, all groups have come together, services have come together, even special cells had changed and expanded to telephone services as well, so that we could reach out to more people at this time, more women facing violence. But I don't know if we've seen more violence as much as there is this limitation in access to support. Yeah, not all women have access to their phones also, even those are controlled. The other impact, which has even been written out in many studies, is that impact on sexual and reproductive health will be much higher because access to contraception, sexual violence has increased during this time. So all of that will have an impact, and we'll continue to see its impact actually, unintended pregnancies, and then, even if they want abortion, not having access to such a healthcare service. All of these are being seen as some of the health consequences of, when I say health, you need to understand it also in terms of mental health, right? It's not devoid of, it's on the same spectrum of health. So if you have an unintended pregnancy, it's bound to cause distress. In fact, even our MTP Act, if you look up, says that any unwanted pregnancy that is causing so much distress to the woman, it becomes one of the points where she can go in for abortion. So there is distress level associated with all of this. Yeah. One thing that we did want to focus a lot during COVID times was the woman's safety. So there was a lot done in terms of safety, crisis intervention, some women calling in extreme urgent situations where they needed to get out of that space and move to a safer space. So because of our strategic location within the police station and our established relationship with the police, we were able to connect with the police, coordinate to ensure that vehicular support or even whatever e-pass was required, all of that we were able to do. And when we talk of multi-agency response, what Taranga pointed out to, it would also mean See, there were many women who, because of violence, had health consequences. They needed medical care. So we have to have that relationship with different stakeholders in advance so that at the time of crisis, we're able to connect with each of them. You can't in a crisis just call up and say, I'm so and so and I need this kind of support. I'm referring this person. There's a lot of groundwork involved before you can actually quickly do that in a crisis. So that is again a very important role as a social worker, to have your networks in place and to then be able to connect all of these together. I think I have, yes, half an hour. So shall we open up for questions? Anything from this session or any other questions that you may have surrounding this?
Yeah, Aarti, can I just add one line?
Yeah.
Sentence? Sorry, I just wanted to add one quick sentence, which is some what we are saying from our experience as social work practitioners intervening in violence, especially gender-based violence of all kinds, is that see, a woman's mental and emotional well-being and mental health, therefore, is not addressed only through traditional functional psychology wale interventions, which is saying only counseling or only psychological interventions. It requires many things. If I don't have a feeling of safety, if I don't have a feeling of justice, if all my other needs are not met, if I'm not aware of my rights, my mental health is not necessarily going to be as good as what it could be otherwise. So that is our understanding as feminist social work ke framework mein crisis intervention is. So yeah, we'll close with that. I remember,
I'll give you an example of this, Taranga, just what you said. This particular woman who had once come in saying, father had come in saying she's on psychiatric treatment, and she says she wants to leave the house, but you have to speak to her to tell her to continue living in this house. She's not capable of taking care of herself. But the woman was earning and was taking and was on her prescriptive medication and was coming in for support over here. For support, and she was very clear that no, I want to live alone because I've faced violence all my life. I've had enough of this. So we have to recognize her agency and provide that kind of support that Taranga is talking about. If we had only engaged in, say, psychological services, she will not be able to, how will she leave the house? She also needed another space to stay. So with that empowerment, you need to connect her to those resources where she can get her alternative accommodation. Not everyone can afford a flat. So she needs that alternative accommodation. She went for it. You need to give her that psychoeducation of continuing her prescriptive medication. Engage with the psychiatrist on, okay, we are seeing this kind of progress. So do you want to reduce the dose? Engage with the psychiatrist on that. And then when the father keeps coming back to say, okay, now we've lost contact. She's an adult. You have to recognize that also. And as long as she says, I am safe and I am capable of doing what I am doing, we actually saw a huge improvement in her mental health, in her mental well-being also. So you see how all of this is connected. I just want to give an example of what Taranga said. It's so important to connect with various things and not just focus on one aspect alone. We find that it has a much greater effect on well-being than doing one thing.
Absolutely. Thank you, Aarti. That was a very good example. Diksha is asking a question in the chat. How can we as a student of WCP get trained in feminist counseling? When we were students, Trupti used to teach that as a separate course. Trupti, I don't know, you can only tell actually. You can answer this question. Aarti and I know less about what is curricular.
Yeah, we learned on the field, no? I mean, I too learned on the. I had to unlearn a lot of things that I had studied in my mainstream counseling course. No F of feminism also, but then after coming into work is where picked up.
Yeah. Trupti, do you want to answer that by any chance? Is she there? I don't know. Maybe she's.
We put her on the. Yeah.
I think she may be on a call or something. Yeah, sorry.
You want to take it up?
Yeah, no. What?
You take it up.
No. So I don't know actually. I know that she used to teach a course, but now I don't know if that course is there. So that's why I'm saying that. I mean, Diksha, can we wait for this question to be answered by Trupti? Otherwise, you write to. Ask Trupti, and I'm sure she'll get back to you on that. Yeah. Yeah, or write to one of us and we'll find out.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Anybody else has any questions?
Yes.
Yes, please. Celeste.
Yeah. So the question I had was that what do you think how we as mental health social workers should tackle the problem of domestic violence? I mean, given much beyond the therapeutic interventions, and given that the domestic violence is one of the major reasons of women developing mental health issues.
See, I think Aarti has explained a lot in terms of what we can do different in our actual counseling practices. I have given some kind of tips or whatever, you know, perspective level, whatever. One thing that you can do is that you can look at spaces which are trying to provide psychosocial services in particular, or working through a mental health kendrit approach on violence. So for example, and which are mostly community based, like for example, you know, one I said is like iCall itself, right? Which is a field action project of TISS, which is a National Psychosocial Services Helpline. The other is Sneha, who about 1.5 years ago, no, more than that, a few years ago, they started this whole model of doing just providing psychosocial but mainly counseling, you know, so a mental health approach wala services to women survivors of violence in informal urban settlements in Mumbai where they work. And these centers worked in linkage with Sneha's own on ground in-person services for crisis intervention, as through women community members who were like leaders, and the connect between Sneha and the Sneha NGO and women on ground, but also through their work with part-time work with police stations, and also their Little Sister app, yeah, where women could download that app in those spaces and then, you know, report the violence or seek help, you know, from Sneha NGO. So they also had this particular mental health services wala center also to support those specific needs of women in the community, in the what is known as a slum itself, informal urban settlement. So, you know, you can find spaces that are doing this work and then bring in your lens as a trained social worker and your skills into doing that work. So that's the only additional thing I can say, apart from what Aarti has already, you know, in detail suggested, that if your interest is mental health, you look at spaces where mental health is a key category of analysis or concern, and bring in your skills and understanding as a survivor-centric social work practitioner to that. Yeah, so that you can move beyond the therapeutic. Yeah, so that is what I would say. Yeah. Okay, Diksha, did I answer your question?
So, ma'am, Celeste will take read out the questions. So
okay, right. Okay.
Trupti has also responded in the chat box. WCP, fieldwork placement.
Fieldwork placement is with special cell primarily, and also we have a class of women-centered social work where we teach skills of intervention. Correct. So that Trupti teaches that, right? Yeah. Women-centered social work practice where in the intervention skills feminist counseling is dwelt upon. So that's your answer, Diksha. Diksha has asked another question also on the chat. So Celeste, you have question before that or more?
No, I will just be reading out the questions.
Okay. So you read out Diksha's question, no problem.
So the next question we have is from Angfu Dorji.
Yeah.
He's asking, do you guys work in collaboration with organizations that work on livelihood issues to support women?
Yes, we do make referrals and linkages. Yes, definitely. I mean, all kinds of organizations, vocational training, you know, skill development authority, many, of course. See, there are many, like I said, that our interconnections and referrals are according to what each survivor wants. So it could be anything at all, and we will connect the woman to that. We will do the research if we have not already done it, as Aarti said, and we maintain a full resource directory which is regularly updated in each cell, each district, so that we are constantly, and we share this information across all cells also, so that we are constantly making the requisite connects. Lots of people are doing lots of good work, you know, sarkari, gair sarkari, everybody is doing. So we have to ensure that you find that perfect fit, that match, which is why it's a highly individualized or customized intervention process and strategy with each woman. There is no thappa, there is no one stamp, one blanket thing that you can do with everybody. You know, one more question that Diksha has
One
asked.
second, just in addition to what you said, that it's also a lot of research, like Taranga pointed out. It means you can't just Google up any service and refer the woman. Yeah, you need to understand what is the ideology or working method of that particular organization that you are going to refer to. Also, things change over the years, so we need to keep our resource directory also updated from time to time, and that forms an important part of the work.
Yep. And it's also why we are part of networks and consultations and various platforms and fora, so that we can keep discovering and updating, you know, who is doing new and good work. Yeah, so that is also very important. Like, as social workers, in any case, our education is in our own hands. By the way, I just want to say, like what Asha ma'am said just now, that, you know, it has to be, even this topic of choice of this webinar is student driven, right? You feel this is something which is a requirement of the new world or the world order or whatever, so you're looking at how will we do this work in the future, because we want to do this work, right? So you have to take your education in that sense, general knowledge, everything. See, social work practice is, whether you're a trained social worker or not, okay, let me put it this way, social development sector practice is an interdisciplinary space. You have to know everything: law, politics, you know, mental health, science, you name it, and we have to know it. Yeah, so we have to do that work of constantly educating ourselves, keeping ourselves up to date. Definitely. Acha, quickly, Diksha's question: often women are unwilling to report the violence. In that case, what is the role of special cell? As providing aid to the one who is willing is a bit easy than those who are unwilling to report. So like I said at the beginning, Diksha, that, you know, we are working with women who very clearly want a certain kind of, want that police or police type ka, you know, that part of the criminal justice system which is mandated with ensuring law and order, to step in with some amount of authority to say end the violence, because Pani has come till here for her. All right, but of course there are various people working at various stages and in various spaces. So we are just one of many different kind of interventionists, and which is why helplines are so important. Telephonic helplines, now they're doing email service, chat, bot wala chat app services also, like iCall is doing. It's very important, because a woman who's unsure will want to do an anonymous distance wala, remote wala, one-time call. So you have to have those machinery also, those mechanisms also. So of course, I mean, we all pick our area of specialization or where we decide to work. Nobody else is working as deeply and as long term 36 years with police system and within police system the way we are. So we are doing this in particular, but we think all systems, all spaces, community, everywhere, online, everywhere there needs to be help for women surviving violence, because violence is everywhere. There is cybercrime also now. Online violence is so huge, and it's increased.
So
During the lockdown, we had one case where we had to intervene, where a woman was being stalked online, you know, and obscene pictures and messages, and it was, I mean, so it's not like violence stops just because a woman is even with a so-called safe or non-violent family. The
form of violence has also changed, no? Newer and newer forms of violence keep coming up.
Yeah, newer forms of violence. Now that's why 354 had to be amended in 2012-13 under the CLA. Why was that? Voyeurism, stalking, all this was brought in. Acid attacks, it's happening at taluk level, block level now, you know, whereas it was not at all common 20 years ago. You know, there were very rare incidents. So of course patriarchy is also changing. As you ensure women's rights and empowerment, patriarchy also comes up with newer forms of violence. Yeah, so that is something which is important to remember. Yeah. Yeah.
Also, law has also understood that not everybody wants to report to the police or take criminal action per se, which is why you have the civil law, which is Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act. It's very interesting. Go through it. It's simple to read, but quite nuanced in its manner of development.
Yeah. Yes. Any other questions? Sorry, Celeste, I cut you.
No problem. It's okay. So the next question is by Khushbu. Her question is, one of the major issues women with mental illness suffer is economic dependence. How do we need to help them to achieve that, so that they can evade from abusive relationships? Here we would like to ask about the women's right of property as well.
Absolutely. So you answered your own question. See, there are two types of situations. Okay, Aarti, you can detail this further if you want, but I'll summarize it by saying there are two types of situations, right? One is where a woman by law has has rights, okay, whether it is governmental or commons land, common property or family property, inheritance, rights from the marital family, rights from natal family. As a citizen, she has under I don't know, like Indira Awas Yojana, she has the right to land or to, you know, under land redistribution schemes in a state like Bihar. See, one is to ensure that she's aware of, and you help her access her rights as a citizen, as an individual under the law. The other is where she does not have support for very specific kinds of things, like her medical treatment, you know, some kind of like for her education, etc., further education, for setting up her own business, because now she has managed to get her Stridhan back, she has managed to get some, you know, compensation amount with your help through the laws, etc., but she wants to build a separate life for herself now. So she wants to start a livelihood or a profession or whatever. So in that case, we look at very specific sarkari and gair sarkari spaces from where that funds can be one time mobilized for her. Yeah. So there are two types of things that you can do. One is help her access her existing rights, all possible. Okay. Everything that is tangible and material, which has material value. And the other side is to ensure that her specific needs can be met through more charitable or welfare schemes and opportunities and programs. You know, whether it is a scholarship or whether it is whatever, you know, a small first time loan or whatever it is. So absolutely, which is again, I repeat, which is why you should know all the schemes and programs and everything.
Yeah.
Mudra Yojana mein small business ke liye mil sakta hai no cost loan to a BPL woman. So you need to, you know, then connect her with them.
Update.
Yeah, so you need to know the whole range of schemes, programs, and benefits for women, because everything applies to all women, whether she has a so-called diagnosed mental health issue or not, you know. So, yeah.
And also, I think in this question, you're talking about women who are staying on in that abusive relationship only because of the financial dependence. There are many who may be well off financially, but are not ready yet to leave the abusive relationship. So it's not necessary that given financial independence, she will then leave, which is often something that it's a commonly asked question also.
Yeah.
Connected to the education question,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
why do educated women face violence? Yeah.
And you're right, Aarti. That's one of the things we saw in the Delhi evaluation report of the special cells. That women said that once my property and financial rights were secured within the family, it strengthened me to assert against violence while continuing in the same household. So it's not necessary that there has to be a separation or leaving of a relationship. And we are non-judgmental about this in special cells. Like Aarti said, our focus is on safety and safety planning, but it does not mean that we are telling the woman that, oh, you have to leave or you have to stay. That is the woman's call, you know. So yeah, that is there.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Taranga. So
Yeah,
the
no.
next question is, what interventions are planned when women are found to be inciting violence on women, like in between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law? How these cases are taken care of?
Okay, well, see, it is a very common myth कि महिला ही महिला की दुश्मन है और women are women's worst enemies. Right now, we are in a world where, I'm sorry, but both sides of the political spectrum have set up two women against each other and are using them to fight with each other. Okay, we know that. I mean, we know that very well. Okay, parties that have an alliance at the national level, so are at the central government, but and hence have a political understanding or similarity, are also fighting with each other, putting two women in the center of it. See, understand patriarchy. Social work means, and feminist social work means, understanding systems, right? You do that, the ecological framework, right? You look at that, you understand the individual in the context of multiple layers, including the meta, not only macro, but meta, meso, everything, hai na? So if you understand that, you also understand that a woman who participates in violence on another woman, her own survival depends on that participation. So how do you ensure that both women have equal rights? See, if a mother-in-law feels, oh God, I have no property in my name, they will throw me out any second, so let me try and subdue this bahu so that she does not take away all the property for her children, then obviously where is the issue there? The problem in a feminist analysis, the problem is very clear. Who has control of the resources and who is the person who should be brought to the point through social work interventions, through casework, group work, etc., work with individuals, individual, group work, joint meetings, whatever it is, to ensure that he redistributes his sole ownership of property and resources equally to everyone in the family. Yeah, so that everybody has a position of power and nobody needs to fight with each other or participate in violence against each other. Yeah, so I think that, I mean, we, again, this is part of the feminist, you know, social work analysis or lens, and actually Trupti and I have written about this in detail in an article which has been published only last year in this book called Indigenous Social Framework, Social Work, okay, Indigenous Social Work in India, okay, edited by Ushwinder Popley and Ashwini Kumar. So we can try and send you a PDF of the article, since now it's in the public domain, if you write to us, where we've gone into detail about what is so feminist, what are the principles, what is the analysis that we apply in planning strategies and interventions in each case of violence or each situation of violence, you know, where we are intervening. Yeah, so I would say don't look at it so simply as women are inside.
Yeah, because this also comes up a lot in an out of marriage relationship. Na? The other woman is to blame for taking away my husband, but what is the husband doing over there? He's the one with all the power and control and using his power in both spaces. So feminist counseling would be about challenging his power. Yeah. And also explaining to the woman or making her understand that it's not about the other woman as much as it is his responsibility.
And working to secure both women's rights, you know.
Yeah.
Best possible. Yeah. So I think that is.
Yeah, it wouldn't. Yeah, there would be no harm to the other woman just because this one is the primary person who has come into the cell. It wouldn't be like that in any feminist practice. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I hope that answered the question. I don't know. Yeah.
I think we've come to the end of Q&A session.
I had
okay.
I had a question.
Yeah,
I'm
please,
sorry,
please.
and I'm really scared of being misinterpreted here, but I sure hope I'm not.
Disclaimer.
So
no
I was watching this debate about men's involvement in feminist movement, and what there were very valid points made by a person, and I don't want to name him, but what he said was men are not patriarchy, and just like women are not feminist movement is a set of principles and values that you follow, and right now the most the group that needs the most intervention is women, but later it's actually working at equality. And so Hani said that men are they are products of patriarchy and toxic masculinity, and it is a very small proportion, women included, that benefits from this patriarchal system, and the rest of the men and the rest of the women are sufferers of this unjust system. So I mean, if you look at in terms of unemployment, in terms of these are unhealthy forms of expression which they are taking out on their women partners, but it's also because they don't have avenues for healthy expression or avenues to you see how it's a systemic problem and not an individual problem. So in coming to my question is, when with your practice, when you are actually dealing with perpetrators, and how do you look at them, and how much what kind of an approach do you take, and is there any truth to the debate that I heard? I mean, is there any, like, how is the ground reality different from this sort of assessment?
Right. So I'll start with answering that very quickly, but then of course Trupti would be the best person to come in, and then Aarti can also, of course. So very quickly, see, this whole masculinities ka discourse kahan se aaya? That men are not patriarchy. Men are also instrumentalized in patriarchy by being taught that violence is the only way of being, especially in intimate relationships. Okay. Where does this come from? This discourse itself comes from feminist practitioners on ground, from the women's movement. So that is one thing that we need to be clear, that no feminist practice says do not engage with men 100%, with men or boys, or that masculinities are not toxically socialized into individuals. Yeah. At the very same time, one of the important things that we need to do is you have to work simultaneously with education for behavior change, which is what Trupti's whole PhD is on, and her, is on helping violent men go from violence to resistance, which is a long process, by the way. Okay, because power for an individual man is not so easy to give up. He signs the assurance paper, which is a very specific woman-led, woman-originated, survivor-originated strategy of the special cell. He signs it, but then after 1 year, after 3 months, there is recidivism again. Recidivism means restarting violence, and that is due to parents coming and visiting and saying, "Ah, क्या तू जोरू का गुलाम बन गया? तू डरता है क्या? हम लोग हैं इधर, prove कि तू मेरी कोख से जन्मा है या मेरा ही बीज है." All that kind of thing. Okay, so there is recidivism of all kinds. Recidivism may also take place due to addiction, maybe due to, so it may also be due to violence upon a man who himself has suddenly become unemployed, like has happened during the COVID situation, all right, or who is suddenly no longer has access to substance. All of these things are possible. We don't criminalize the man unless there is a criminal, cognizable offense which the woman wants that there should be a case filed. We don't take on the thing of criminalizing the man. We believe that men can change. People who have been assigned the gender masculine at birth can transform, and we do that process with them. All right. So we are not saying that patriarchy is men, but patriarchy is a structure in which men hold much more power than anybody who is not a cishet man. So we maintain and we retain that consciousness. So I actually had this in my notes, but I thought I was taking too much time when I started speaking in the beginning. It's very important. We connect men with de-addiction, with batterer intervention groups, with a lot of people. Okay, so there are men working in our space, in our kind of space, including like famous people like Edelson. Remember Trupti, who had come from California, from Massachusetts or California or somewhere, who had come to do a training with us also, who call themselves pro-feminist or feminist allies. Yeah, and we welcome, because they are able to work on masculinities and challenging these toxic and violent masculinities even better. We do that, but at the same time, as a social worker who's doing survivor-centric or feminist social work practice, since that was your question, we do not take on the onus of being the support person for that man who has committed violence and where the woman has come for ending of that violence. So we will not become his therapist. We will connect him to addiction, de-addiction services, yes. Okay, we will connect him to a batterer interventions group, to Alcoholics Anonymous. We will help him also access telephonic helplines for anger management or see a therapist, whatever it is. Okay, but we will not become his therapist then. He is not the kendra of our intervention. The kendra of our intervention is that violence should stop. That woman's emotional self needs to be rebuilt. Yeah. So, I mean, that is, and if it was a public debate, feel free to tell me who it was that was talking about this, because maybe I can also then tell you if anybody has problematized or critiqued this person's position. It may already be an established, written out, well-versed kind of discourse or debate. So feel free to tell me if you want to, otherwise it's okay, no pressure. But yeah, I would say that this is our position on work with violent men. Yeah, that they are never going to find it easy to give up power, and there's a lot of work that happens in that. So our core concern is to stand with the person upon whom violence has taken place. Yeah. Yes. Sorry, Aarti, Trupti, anybody wants to? Yeah.
When you were talking about this connect with the de-addiction centers or for rehabilitation, and that we will not be the main support person, we also encourage someone from the man's family to be the support, because again, otherwise the burden of the entire matter falls on the woman. So we are quite clear also to ensure that someone else takes that responsibility from his family for him, and it doesn't again fall on the woman, because otherwise it'll be like she has to adjust while he's going through this entire withdrawal and all of that.
Yeah. So like Mava, Samyak, these are organizations in Maharashtra and Mumbai and Pune who are doing very good group interventions of men who are trying to get past, violence as socialized into them and working on different kinds of, so yeah, I mean, we connect people and we work along with those people, because our common goal is to end violence against women. And in terms of allyship, I think that as long as no man is trying to come and say, oh, I will lead this movement, or I am the boss in this space, I mean, everyone is part of feminist movements. Yeah. So there is no particular, whatever, there is no set hierarchy. Any woman. And I will also not say that all women are not feminist, by the way. In the feminist understanding, every woman's voice is valid. every woman's position is a different strand of feminist thought. Okay, so there are, and if you remember my class from first year, that foundation course, I talked to you about right-wing feminisms also, because there are right-wing feminisms. Yeah, it's not true that any woman will say that, oh, women are 100% equal with men. No woman will say that. There are things that are very specific to women's life experiences or lived experiences, which do place them in various kinds of disadvantage, even if very momentary. You know, even if only once you have had to take the maternity leave and, you know, undergo some loss, small loss to your career, even that small thing is a substantial difference. So that is also something important about feminism. Feminisms don't say ki all women are, there are some women who are not feminists. That's not really true. We don't take theka of it. There is no one boss or leader, na? No one icon जिसके नाम पे या books पे हम चल रहे हैं. हम सभी leader हैं. So in that sense. Trupti, you wanted to add anything?
Taranga, Trupti has dropped out of
Zoom. Okay. Yeah, she's also having, we are all having internet issues. We are very lucky कि अभी चल रहा है because it rained a lot in this area today. So yeah. Okay.
So can I ask Asha Banu ma'am to speak a few words to us?
No few words because we have already exceeded time.
Yeah.
Then I thoroughly enjoyed, and Taranga, your style of speaking. In fact, I was putting it on the chat box to Trupti. So much passionate, and also the points that you've emphasized, and also for this particular course, it's very important for the students to understand violence being the cause and effect both, and how interventions have to be positioned in both scenarios, and that's very important. And so that way, that's very much established, and also from your field experience you have brought in. And not that sometimes you know, we are going to be practitioners. Sometimes it's also important for the students to understand that they are also into violent spaces. So that way it's very, very essential that it's not from the helper point of view, but also self. If there are so much of a contemplations, then this session also is going to give them way forward to think about. So I think thank you so much for your really energized and information-packed session, and definitely it would have helped all of our students. Thank you so much, both of you.
We are very happy and thank you. And I put my email ID in the chat to everyone. So if anyone has any further questions or wants any readings or anything, then feel free to email. Although I'll be replying only next week because now onwards I'm only doing shifting, which is going to take me 3 days. So yeah, okay.
So shall I use this opportunity to thank all of you? So first of all, it was very informative and insightful session, seeing violence against women from a feminist perspective. So I thank both the speakers for giving us such valuable knowledge and spending your valuable time with us. I would also like to thank Professor Asha Banu for providing us the opportunity for organizing this webinar. I would also like to thank Professor Trupti for being part of this webinar, as well as for connecting us with the speakers. I would also like to thank all the participants. Without you, this couldn't have been successful. Also, I appreciate the coordination of the team members to organize this webinar. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.